Hi, welcome back to Sowing Seeds. You've made it. This is session 6, the very last one of this schedule. And in the first video, we gave you what was really happening now, as well as the grief that comes about when you realize what's happening. And then in our next 4 videos, we gave you a very quick look at the answers that are available right now, both from a technology standpoint, as well as being an awareness of what we need to do, how we need to act to move from consuming the earth to caring for the earth. So today we're going to focus on more signs of hope, but we're also going to transition to how do you become a sign of hope? What can you do? You remember that picture, Earth Rising, the picture that should have changed our society so that we realize how small and fragile it is? Well, it didn't. And I would suspect that the reason it didn't is we didn't talk about it. We didn't share our understanding of how small and fragile and how precious this treasure is that God put into our lives. But there are reasons for hope. There really are. I've been in a funk for the last couple of years. But right now, there are signs of hope springing up all over the world. In fact, over in Europe, every Friday, the kids from school go on strike for climate activism. It's amazing. Tens of thousands across Europe every Friday saying we've got to change what we're doing. And it's affecting the political leaders in Europe. The head of the European Union has committed billions for new energy. So there's signs of hope. There are signs of hope here. The kids here, several years ago, started a lawsuit against the federal government saying you have denied us our inalienable rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and property, because what you've done by supporting the fossil fuels is destroy our future. That kid's lawsuit is still going forward. 3 different times the federal government has sued in federal court at a higher level to get this case dismissed. And it hasn't worked. That's still going forward. Once again, they filed another objection and the kids are still fighting that, but that lawsuits keep going. And you realize that we say, well, you can't sue the federal government over this, but if you think back some decades ago, we always said you couldn't file a suit against big tobacco and win, and they failed and they failed and they failed, and they finally won one, and that's what it took to change the smoking laws in this country. In fact, there's actions all over the earth. When we were in Paris for the Paris Climate Accord a few years back, the city of Paris and France banned public demonstrations because they were afraid of upsetting everybody. And so the demonstrators came up with an original idea. They filled a square with shoes, the shoes of people who would be marching if they were allowed to march. And finally, the French government allowed them to march. State attorneys in several major states are suing the fossil fuel companies because we've got evidence that they knew their product was destroying the earth, and then they suppressed that scientific evidence. So state attorneys, not the federal attorney, but the state attorneys, are suing big oil companies, saying we knew that you lied and that your product is destroying the earth, and you are liable for the damages. But also, on a political standpoint, governors formed the Governors Climate Alliance after President Trump announced that we were pulling out of the Paris Accord. That Governors Climate Alliance has now grown to 22 governors. Pretty soon it's going to be a majority. There's a Mayor Climate Alliance. Mayors in cities across this nation, over 500 of them signed on to this. In fact, just recently, my own mayor in this little city of Aurora, Illinois, has signed on to it. But there's also signs of legislative movement on the national level as well as the state level. And so we're starting to see all these talks and discussions about what's the best way forward, from things that are exciting as the Green New Deal and other measures. So there's signs all over the place. Everyday, ordinary people like you and I are involved in divestment campaigns, getting their institutions to divest from being in fossil fuels, because if it's wrong to destroy the earth, it's wrong to profit from that destruction. There's 100% renewable campaigns right now in the city of Chicago. They're going for 100% renewable. In the state of Illinois and in other Midwest states, they're looking at being totally renewable energy by 2050. There's activism stopping new pipelines. There's the faith groups. Every major faith group has green groups that are actively participating in changing our world. People are arising. There are signs of hope. So that brings us to this final issue. What can you and I do? What can you do in response to the climate crisis? Katharine Hayhoe, a leading climate scientist and an evangelical, says the most important thing we can do is to talk about it. Talk to others, have conversations, tell stories. Don't preach, don't demand. Simply tell the stories on why this is important to you. I remember the first time I got arrested protesting a pipeline. I was already gray-haired, and so I'm a little bit of a control freak. And so we went down the day before. This was a week long. Every day, groups would protest in front of the White House, and a group would get arrested. And so we went down the day before so I could observe what was happening, so I knew what would happen the next day when I protested and was arrested. And while I was sitting there observing the demonstration, I had people come up to me and they asked, "What's going on? What is this group of people doing?" And I explained it was a group of people that were opposing a new tar sands oil pipeline, because tar sands oil is the most dirty fossil fuel that we have. And the people who were asking me that question looked over at the group protesting and said, "Them? Why, they look normal. They look like you and me." That's what gets people to change, when they see that everyday, ordinary people value the future of their kids enough to speak. Tell your story. The first time we took the grandkids, and advocated in a protest in front of it, our grown-up kids, their parents, got their eyebrows a little out of joint, but that's all right. And I remember after I got arrested, the kids' parents were talking about this, and the grandkids overheard them. And our youngest grandson at the time was 6 years old, Dixon. And he thought this was a fascinating idea, what he had heard his parents say about Grandpa getting arrested. And so the next day at school, he decided to tell everybody. And so they were in a line waiting for the school bus, and he announced, "My grandpa got arrested while my grandma watched." That got the expected excitement from the other kids. And so he kept repeating it even louder each time. "My grandpa got arrested while my grandma watched. My grandpa got arrested while my grandma watched." And the teacher came up and hushed him. "Now, Dixon, we don't talk about these things in polite company, so hush now." And so later on, when our daughter went to pick up Dixon from school, the teacher confided in her what had happened and then said, "It must be a very difficult time for you, that things have gotten so bad that your mom had to call the police on your dad." She said, no, you don't understand. They were in front of the White House. It was a planned protest. She was there recording it on video. So sometimes you get misconstrued, but there's always a good story, and people can relate to it. So talk about it. Hold conversations in your coffee hour. Hold conversations one-on-one with the neighbor over the backyard fence, with the friend at a soccer game. But hold conversations that simply say, climate change is real, it's human caused. We have to respond with urgency because we care about the future for our kids. You can do this. What's the next thing you should do? Well, you should walk the talk. All right? So the first thing is to talk about it, but now you got to walk the talk. What do I mean by that? You have to be an example of living a different way. How can you do that? Well, we just happen to have 48 steps that you can take or decide whether you want to take. 48 steps! Yeah, 48 different action items. You don't have to do them all, but take a look at it. I get several different responses to these 48 action items. The first response is somebody will read one of the first ones, and they'll say, "This is so easy. This is so simple. I don't know why you even bothered putting it down on paper, because we've been doing this since forever." I say, "Okay, don't need to worry about that one." And then the next reaction is somebody will flip over to 48 and they'll look at one of the more difficult ones and they'll say, "You know what? You're nuts if you think I'm going to do that. You're nuts if you think I'm going to change my life that much. And okay. But somewhere between the, oh, this is way too easy, and, oh, you're nuts, this is way too tough, there are some that you could be doing. But the most important thing about doing them is to talk about them. Talk about them at church. Talk about them at the soccer game. Talk about them in your backyard. In there. Say, I've tried this, and you know what? I thought it was difficult, but I can do this. Let's just take one. Reducing the amount of meat that you eat, just like that was in that video. Reducing the amount of meat has a tremendous effect on the climate. Driving a little smarter, a little less crazy with our gas on the accelerator, that has a big effect. Taking fewer airplane trips, that has a big effect. Find a step. Putting LEDs in, changing how we cook, changing how we heat, all of those have steps. There's 48 of them. You'll find some that you can do. You'll find some that can stretch you that you didn't think you could do, but you can do. But the most important thing is to talk about why you're doing it. That your kids' future and your grandkids' future is worthy of changing your life. What else can you do? Well, you can think about advocating. Because ultimately, all our personal actions, while very good and they teach us a new way of life, is insufficient. We have to change how the game is played in our society and all the other societies. And so we have to get our government to quit supporting fossil fuels and to go whole hog, 100% in renewable energy in order to save the planet. We have to do it fast. And the only way that's going to happen is if we advocate. Now, you don't got to go and get arrested like I do occasionally. You don't have to go that far. But you can write a letter to your congressman. In fact, you could drop into your congressman's local office and say, you know, this is important enough that I'm here on my dime telling you that you work for me, not the big oil companies. So, advocate, but do it in groups, all right? You don't have to do this all by yourself. But stories, even when you go visit your congressman or your senator or your mayor's office, tell a story, because there's a power in stories. Sowing seeds through storytelling is the most effective fertilizer to reap a harvest. Wendell Berry says it's all a question of story. Remember that slide? We're in trouble right now because we do not have a good story. We're in between stories. The old story, the account of how we fit into it, is no longer effective, yet we have not learned a new story. You remember that thin blue line around the earth is the only thing that gives us life, and how important it is to protect it? How many people know that? Tell that story. Kathleen Dean Moore. They'll want to know the story of this time. Our grandchildren will. This pivotal decade, whether we either found our way forward or did not, they will give our time a name. It is that important. The point is, we are the ones who will create the story of our times. What will it be? Will be the time where we change from consuming the earth to caring for God's good creation. How much time do we have to act? According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the international organization, we have less than 12 years to dramatically change our mistakes that we're doing. This decade is the most critical time to do it. And what's the most important thing we can do? Talk about it. The very most important thing we can do is talk about it. Sociologists tell us that besides tipping points in the physical world, there are tipping points in the social world. And somewhere around 10% to 13% of the population accept something, it then becomes a waterfall. We're getting very close to that, and what's going to bring us over that is talking about it. Right now, in surveys, 2/3 of Americans realize and accept that climate change is real and it's happening now and it's human caused. We just need to bring everybody into the discussion. The purpose of this series, and I hope you've benefited from it, but the purpose of it is to invite you to become a sower of climate hope. Going back to that parable from Matthew. Listen, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path, and the birds came and they ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell upon thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen. There will be people who will reject you talking to them. There will be people who might actually growl at you. Walk away. They're just the thorns. But there will be people whose ears are fertile to hear the truth and embrace it. That's where you sow the seeds. Before you can become a sower, you have to believe in the power of seeds, and that's what we've been telling you with these video series. That's why we showed you all those advances in technology. In fact, if you want more of them, we have a whole other series called Come and See, and it has 36 videos on new technologies that have the answer on what we need to do. And if you want more than that, you go to the book Project Drawdown. It has 100 answers. These seeds are powerful. Believe them. We can do this. We can make a better future for our kids and our grandkids. In the Gospel of Luke, the 9th chapter, talking about Jesus sending out his disciples. Jesus sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal. He said to them, take nothing for your journey, no staff, no bag, nor bread, nor money, not even an extra tunic. Whatever house you enter, stay there, and they leave from there. Whenever they do not welcome you as you are leaving that town, shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them. They departed and went through the villages, bringing the good news and curing diseases everywhere. That's the call to become a sower, to heal the destruction of this earth, to bring our story to people. When they don't accept it, don't let it get to you. Just shake that dust off your feet and move on and keep sowing those seeds. That's what God's calling us to do. What's our top 3 actions? Talk, walk, advocate. So we're at the end of our series, but you got the next most important part, which is to talk about it. Have a discussion among yourselves. Talk about what spoke to you. Which video segments meant something to you and why? What are the wisdom quotes and insights that really struck you? What's the scripture that did? What tasks are you thinking about doing? And who's willing to share it with you? We can do this. We can save God's good creation so that the future for my kids and your kids and my grandkids and your grandkids is bright and glorious, not hostile and dangerous. Blessings on your journey. Take care.